All right, we should be live now.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We've got a ton of folks here for this interactive quarterly updates on Avalanche. Our team has spent quite a bit of time working with some of the top DeFi, Layer 1, other protocol communities in the past couple of months on coming up with a robust quarterly updating framework. And we're really excited to have three folks from Ava Labs here to participate in this discussion today. I should note as we kick off that this quarterly report that was built by Messari was authored entirely by the two analysts on this call, James and Chase. They're going to be leading the discussion here, and what I think has been really powerful about these sessions so far is it shows just how open and transparent these emerging economies are, in that an independent team with no direct affiliation or connection to the underlying protocol is able to come in and with about a month's worth of work, build a really robust framework for making sure that we monitor keep KPIs, ecosystem developments, governance updates, and a whole slate of material bits of information on a quarterly basis going forward. So we're excited to work with the Avalanche community on this. Excited to work with the Ava Labs team on coloring in some of the details that these two uncovered during their analysis, and most importantly, we want to use these as a forum for people to ask our analyst team questions about the reports, but also be able to interface with some of the leaders within the Avalanche community. Today, as has been typical in some of the initial kickoff calls, we have folks from Ava Labs, which is certainly one of the central parties that's been doing great work in advancing the Avalanche ecosystem. In the future, we'll also pull in folks from other parts of the community and other either corporate or non-corporate entities or just other meaningful individual contributors to the project as well. So with that said, hopefully the context is in place. As usual, this is not investment advice. And do your own research, yada yada. But that's why we're here. So we're going to try to let Chase and James take it over, walk through their analysis, the update on the Avalanche product and project, and make sure that we have plenty of time to learn more about what's ahead and ask any clarifying questions in the quarter behind. Take it away, guys.
All right, thank you, Selkis. So I just dropped the link to this report into the chat if you guys want to follow along. So if you guys have been following some of the quarterly reports that Messari has been publishing recently, you'll notice that it's mostly Web3 or DeFi related. So this Avalanche report was actually our first stab at tackling what a quarterly report for a layer one network could look like. And so the way that we decided to break it out is into these three buckets of network usage, ecosystem and developer activity, and then staking and decentralization. Before we dive into all of the specifics of those, I think it would be really great if one of the team members of Ava Labs could talk about what differentiates Avalanche, like from a consensus perspective from other smart contract networks, and how it fits into this overall layer one game that's being played.
Why don't, Nick, you feel like you want to touch on the consensus piece?
You're on mute, Nick.
Yep. So I think there's three areas that we focus on at the core technology layer that are all heavily driven by the consensus algorithm. First one is speed, so time to finality, and that is really the underlying driver that the consensus algorithm allows us to achieve. It's very fast. It's using an entirely new type of consensus algorithm that was invented by Team Rocket, and that Avalanche has been used to implement. I think the second piece there is the ability to scale, and we'll talk a little bit about this later today, but that gets into this concept of subnets and kind of really we're heavily focused on going forward. And then the last one is just what is the cost to transact. So we're constantly making changes to make sure that the network is affordable for projects to build on and for people to transact on.
Awesome.
I'll back on what Nick said real quick. I think at the cornerstone of everything that we do and that we've been doing is all dependent on the Avalanche consensus, right? The third ever novel consensus after Classical and Nakamoto. Everyone's kind of made edits to those in the past and optimized a little bit. But no one's really brought to the market a new consensus algorithm that actually allows us to scale at the level that you've seen Avalanche do. And what I believe we're going to focus on in this call today and then look to the future is Q4 really focused on the EVM chain, the C chain that we have, right? That enables Web3, DeFi, NFTs, and everything of the sort. But that's just the initial thing, right? That was the first focus, is to show how an EVM can scale. And then now going forward, we'll see how we can continue to build on that through everything else.
Awesome. Really good background for our audience here. I want to go back to something that Nick touched on as we dive into like the network usage data. So going through the report, we saw Q4 was just a huge explosion in network activity. Active addresses were up to about like 70,000 per day. We had transaction activity reaching about 40% of Ethereum's. And so maybe talk a little bit about like the gas spikes that you guys saw in like late November, early December, and kind of Avalanche's approach to keeping those down, but also using them as like a key source of revenue for the network.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two good points here. One is, those gas fees do ensure liveness, and so they were set fixed when we launched on the C chain. They were at 225. So the first thing we did was to drop those dramatically, so that the floor now is at 25. And then there was an implementation on something called dynamic fees as a part of the apricot releases. And so dynamic fees really allows the network to now kind of breathe. So as there's more congestion or more demand, you'll start to see those fees creep up. And so we keep tweaking on that and keep improving it so that we can keep scaling and manage to keep the fees lower. So the fees are actually dramatically lower from when that point. And when that happened, when we had that congestion, that's really when we put a lot of effort into making sure that it could scale and that the fees would remain low, but we would also have the guarantee of liveness at the same time.
And of course, there was subsequent releases such as Snowman++ and many other network upgrades. And to Nick's point, right, the ultimate goal here is to focus on liveness, is to ensure that the network is humming along. Fees could spike up and down, but the fact that the network continues to hum along despite these moments of very high network usage has been a testament to the kind of the team's architecture and follow-up and updates as we go on. So.
Awesome. And in terms of like largest catalysts to this growth in network adoption, do you guys see anything beyond like the Avalanche Rush liquidity mining program as just being large sparks for why everyone started to migrate over to the network?
So Avalanche Rush definitely was a huge catalyst, but I think previous to that, the team here on this call, as well as the broader team, took a step back during those 2-3 months where things were somewhat slow, or you want to call a mini bear, and really strategize as to the steps, right? Anybody can throw money at an issue. Anyone can incentivize, but if the necessary kind of cornerstone pieces aren't there, so that once that liquidity is deployed and once those users come to utilize it, it's really not going to make that much of a difference, right? We've seen this across the board. Money comes and goes. The first piece of this that I think was the most important and that became a meme is the Avalanche Bridge, right? I think you saw good morning, good bridging, right? And that's a testament to Nick and the product team for building what we believe to be the fastest, best, and easiest bridge to use, right? So as on the heels of announcing Rush, that bridge was live and it was ready. So even before the Rush incentives were deployed, we saw exponential growth in usage and people coming over the bridge because they wanted to come and check it out, right? So that bridge gave people who previously were not in tune with Avalanche, weren't keeping up, or were wondering what was going on, but didn't have as many on-ramps to really jump into the ecosystem. And this is previous to C-Chain exchange listings, right? So previous listings on global exchanges were focused on the X chain. C-chain integrations were in process, such as Coinbase and other major exchanges. But the first on-ramp really for a lot of people into our DeFi ecosystem was that bridge. So that was really kind of the front door and the welcome for people to come in. Once they came in and before they got incentives, they started to realize the ease of use of the Avalanche platform. Kind of, what I see on crypto Twitter is that Avalanche just works, right? It's faster, it's cheaper. The UI UX of just interacting with the network is there, and we captured people's attention, and it became a fun place to do DeFi again. Put on top of that, of course, the rush rewards that were a boost, as well as kind of the exponential amount of partnerships and different applications and platforms that we brought on, really fueled this thing to take off.
And just to add to that, I think the team, if it isn't clear already, that the team is very focused on user experience. It's something that we spend a lot of time on, and also, we listen to the community to figure out what some pain points are. And I think going forward, you'll definitely see what that focus looks like when implemented. And we'll have new products that really make it easy for users to not just enter the DeFi ecosystem, but the Avalanche ecosystem as a whole, right? Like there are going to be other sectors that take off on the platform, and we're going to see everything grow, and we're going to make sure that people just kind of have an easier time getting into crypto, not even just like crypto native folks bridging onto Avalanche. We're trying to focus on mainstream adoption as well.
Yeah, and the only, to add to Lydia's point, even before, and to John's point, even before the bridge happened, the engineering team, like the very core engineering team, had to make sure that like everything that was underneath it could scale. And so the bridge launched in August, but that time that John talked about between, January and July, there was a heavy emphasis in making sure that the underlying platform was going to be able to take on the amount of demand that we expected, and they really nailed it.
Awesome. Going into like the DeFi ecosystem a little bit more here. So when I was looking through the data, I thought it was really interesting that the TVL dominance of Avalanche was the fastest growing out of any network over the quarter. And a lot of people will say that can be attributed to the rising prices, but if you strip all of that data back out, like there was just a huge growth in activity that was coming into the network. I think the market cap only grew about like 50% relative to like an 800% in TVL. So I think it was early October that Curve and Ava launched onto the network. Do you guys think that kind of like these launches were what catalyzed the rest of DeFi's growth on the chain, or do you think it was something else that maybe like a better developer experience that may have brought people over?
So it's a mix of all of those things, right? And to the earlier point, the bridge brought people over. People started using the system, the platform, and interacting with native dApps, right? So we had a rich and growing native community of applications, which got a great kind of boost from all the new users. But we had a user base and we added to it. But there's a three-pronged situation here, right? First and foremost, bringing over those Ethereum blue chips like Aave and Curve really did two things. One, they brought a lot of new users as well. People that hadn't yet come now came because there's credibility, there's a track record, there's a history with Aave and Curve, and there's a credibility that they impart. So people come with that, right? And with that, you start to see fellow Ethereum applications follow suit. So on top of those initial guys, you started to see a lot of deployment. So first, you saw the Ethereum blue chips come. Second, you saw the rest of the Ethereum applications come and deploy on us, or port over and deploy on us. But what we've seen in a second stage, which has been really interesting, like Alpha Labs, which has Alpha Homora, decided to launch their new product, Alpha X, on Avalanche first, right? And third, what we're seeing, of course, is that native kind of building, that native community development of applications, and the number of developers has grown significantly, of course, as well. But what you're seeing is a lot of devs that have created really cool and innovative products. that simply can't launch on Ethereum or other chains just because economically it doesn't make sense with the cost of gas or the time to finality. So the speed of Avalanche, the lower fees, the ease of use really makes it an ideal place for a lot of these innovative applications that have been in development or have been in the back of people's minds to really find a new home and to develop and really work with the native Avalanche applications, with the Ethereum blue chips. So it kind of all built upon itself by bringing people in, developers, applications into a great mix that just benefited from everything. And to your point, yes, we did see a tremendous rise in TVL. And of course, there is a rise in price. But as we've seen recently, prices have been going down across the board, and we're still holding our place. So if anything, daily active users, monthly active users, active wallets continue to grow. So at the end of the quarter, I believe you mentioned we were at 40% of Ethereum's daily transactions. I think we're clocking in at anywhere from 70 to 80 on certain days, if not even higher, over the past few weeks. So we're only seeing continued growth, and we're really excited for the pipeline of things that are to come.
So sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Sorry, Chase. One other quick point there is just one of these metrics that the product team closely tracks is inflows across the bridge versus outflows. And so what that really tells us, like, is there a compelling use case once they cross the bridge, right? Are people finding the ability to use it? And so it's 3 across to 1 back right now. And that kind of fluctuates. It gets up to 4. But that's telling us, okay, there is a compelling use case on the other side. People are finding that the time to finality, the low fees, are worth sticking around for. And then they're kind of discovering other avenues onto it. Like maybe they'll start with an Aave and an Occur, but then they discover a Pangolin or a Trader Joe, right, or a Platypus. So there's a lot of these native applications that are popping up that are also starting to create their own market share and really do innovative things.
Yeah, and one of the other metrics I like to look at personally is also the daily active addresses relative to monthly active addresses, because you're talking about engagement at that point, right? So monthly active addresses, we've been growing very exponentially, obviously, in Q4. And December, January, we're kind of at that 800,000 mark, but the daily active addresses really shows how many people are creating addresses and using the platform every day. And that ratio has held constant, just kind of like the average users per day. So I think that's really promising because folks aren't just bridging across and then kind of doing one transaction and not coming back. I think it shows that people are staying and they're actively participating in the ecosystem.
To Nick's point real quick on the bridge outflows, right? I think an important thing to keep in mind is up until a certain point, right? The only way you could kind of bridge out or get out of the ecosystem is to go through a centralized exchange, right? If you want to go into dollars, is to go through Avalanche or to bring Ethereum back over, wrap the Ethereum back over the bridge and go out that way. But primarily USDT and USDC, we have the wrap bridge versions, right? So USDC.E, USDT.E. And with the kind of introduction and integration of native USDC on Avalanche and native USDT on Avalanche, now, as soon as we see exchanges start to support those native stablecoins on us, you'll start to see less kind of outflows, or we anticipate seeing less outflows from the bridge from Avalanche back to Ethereum so that people could bridge their USDC and USDC back to an exchange or to a Nexo or to a Celsius or wherever it is that they might be kind of holding their stables. They'll be able to go straight from the Avalanche ecosystem into an exchange. So we anticipate that number to start going down.
Awesome. So we've got about 10 more minutes here to talk about the metrics and activity from Q4 before I turn it over to Jim to focus more on some of the qualitative events and drivers of this growth. We have a question though from Gucci in the chat, and they say, how will Avalanche plan to keep its user base once Avalanche Rush incentives are depleted or other protocols are offering better incentives? And follow up to that is, how might subnets play a role in terms of building out the Avalanche ecosystem? And one additional question for me is, could you also touch on, how long you guys are planning to have the Avalanche Rush liquidity mining campaign run for?
So Avalanche Rush, when it was announced, was for $180 million. I don't have exactly the amount that's been deployed to date, but there's still a significant amount left there. And it's not as everybody here has noticed, it's not just a dump the money in and see what happens. We've been very methodical with who we want to support, what projects we want to support, and in a thoughtful way. So it's still going to be ongoing, and we anticipate it going through the rest of this quarter, if not longer. And credit to Gucci for keeping an eye on what's going on in the ecosystem, because he definitely can start to see the rumblings of where this is going to go next, right? So Rush was a great program. There are other programs that can come after Rush, right? So we're working through a bunch of that on our end, without giving out too much, of course. There's a lot happening. I think you're already starting to see rumblings around subnets, the ability for the network to continually grow, scale horizontally, GameFi, a million other applications that we're really in process right now on the subnet side.
And in addition to the Rush liquidity mining program, there are other pieces in the ecosystem to support growth of projects coming aboard. Like there is also Blizzard, the ecosystem fund. So a lot, the fund's mandate really is to promote and accelerate the growth and innovation on Avalanche. And that means basically encouraging native projects to build and developers to come here and build out primitives that we're missing, because at the end of the day, it's really about having kind of a more holistic approach to the ecosystem and having pieces that keep users here. Users want things to do. That's what drives transactions. That's what drives the activity. So if we have a robust ecosystem with the right apps and protocols here, then we're going to put all of our resources to kind of promote that growth. That's what's important.
Got it. So the last section that I want to touch on with you guys is just the aspect of decentralization. And that always seems to be one of the largest debates on these smart contract platforms. And there's a lot of people tend to confuse. Everyone has very different definitions of what decentralization is. So I'd be curious to get your guys' take on, how would you quantify decentralization, and how do you believe that Avalanche is able to scale while maintaining said decentralization?
So I can jump in here, and then Lydia, John, you can jump in. But so, the number of validators that are currently running that are supporting the network is one of the key metrics we look at. It's not like there's 10 or 15 or 21. We're well over 1,000 at this point, and the number keeps growing. So that's a primary metric. The other thing that we look at, and kind of like how we plan to scale it, is through the growth and the launching of subnets. So subnets does essentially give us theoretically infinite scale, where you can take aspects of that are currently running on the mainnet, run them on a subnet, have everything interact and cross interoperate, and then you have its own chain that's handling that scale, that also has the ability to write its own rules around gas fees, emissions, validator rules, who gets to validate, who doesn't, what the native token is. So it really gives a lot of flexibility to be able to scale the network up. And really, you're starting to see that specifically, and I think John mentioned around the GameFi, which have different tokenomics and different needs than just what is on the mainnet. And so they're starting to build these custom subnets to be able to have their own chain that has ownership, and be able to control the scalability of that at the same time, and how they're tuning and configuring it.
As of today, I just checked, we're at 1,232 validators, and a minimum stake there is 2,000 a box. So there is a future where that threshold could be potentially lowered, in which case you can just see a continued explosion in the number of validators. And from the metrics that I see all the time, the Nakamoto coefficient is probably the best indicator of decentralization. And from what I saw last week, and I've been seeing, I think we top up on most of the other proof of stake chains. I think we have the highest score amongst the rest of the competition in that regard.
Yeah, and I mean, as I was looking through the data, it's not like the Nakamoto really changes, or it fluctuates heavily, despite you guys averaging in the high 20s, low 30s. So overall, for network security, like, that's really strong. For those of you who might not know what the Nakamoto coefficient, it's basically a measure of the minimum number of validators in a proof of stake network that would need to be compromised in order to collude against the network. A lot of these chains that have smaller validator groups, such as like Binance Smart Chain, it's only just a small handful that you could count on one hand, whereas you would need to get almost 30 here. With that, Jim, I will turn it over to you to go into depth more on some of like the events and catalysts that really drove this growth that we've been talking about here.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. I guess, first of all, just listening for the first 30 minutes here is all very, very insightful. Just taking a quick step back and thinking about the work that Chase and I did over the last quarter and what we're planning to do going forward is, again, it really starts with data-driven insights, right? So we start with really looking at what the data is telling us. And what we basically just discussed here is, wow, basically high growth in every metric that we were evaluating, all the way from number of addresses, daily transactions, so some fundamental activity going on in the network. Of course, TVL, so all and revenue to the protocol, like everything was growing. So once we see that, we it begs the question of well, what's the driver? Why is that, right? And so I think your conversation there kind of touched on a couple of different things, and there is really no one single reason, right, or answer, but just kind of thinking back to what you all just discussed is obviously you were prepared for it before this growth occurred for a number of reasons as you're developing the core platform, improvements and upgrades through Apricot, and then the launch of the bridge. So it kind of led itself up to almost like a perfect timing to just let the floodgates open. And then kind of, we're working through that again with incentives and the Rush program. So as we're looking at it, it's like, okay, well, yeah, of course, the incentive program has a bit to do with it. The bridge has a bit to do with it. You still kind of wonder, like, okay, well, why so many addresses and why so many more developers developing and deploying unique contracts? Why are there more developers develop a core platform? And I think that gets back to some of the things that you expressed about user experience, right? So there was a lot of things for us to try to figure out, right, and find out like what were the key drivers, right? And it's not as easy as it sounds when there's so much going on. But what I wanted to do is kind of take a little bit of a step back and look at some more macro sort of things that are going on that maybe are showing up in the data, but maybe aren't yet. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that because, I think it was almost even multiple times a week, the community and we all were seeing household names come across the headlines, right? Anywhere from Topps collectibles, right? Like I collected Topps baseball cards when I was a kid, so I still have them. I've like tons of cardboard boxes with cardboard little cards in them from Topps. And so I know that name, right? And so when I see that name, I get excited, and obviously in partnership with Major League Baseball, Topps is launching basically an NFT collection of collectibles. What other names? Deloitte, Andretti Formula E, MasterCard. There were so many that the New York Islanders, Banksy came up in this, right? Fractionalized NFT of a well-known Banksy piece. There was a mural that formed as an NFT. I think that's in Chicago where Chase is right now. And it's sort of still ask the question of why, why Avalanche, why launch an NFT, a one-to-one NFT of Kanye West on Avalanche, right? Versus any other chain. So those questions are still kind of out there for us. But I'm curious, as you think about all of and we've already touched on this, but what, I guess out of all of the initiatives and all of the partnerships that we saw occur over Q4 and whether or not they actually influence the data, or they will in the future. Which ones you guys are the most excited about, and which initiatives that we know about, not the ones that are probably to come, that you're most excited about and see as the greatest opportunity to grow the ecosystem?
So I'll start real quick. I think first and foremost, credit is due to Ethereum and the Ethereum community, right? The growth that we've seen happens to be the EVM. Other platforms are using other smart contract layers. We chose EVM because to us, it's the standard smart contract platform. The benefit that we've had with the Avalanche consensus, of course, and this is what was conveyed to all of our partners. And at a point, it's not take our word for it, it's go and try it for yourself. The speed, the cost, right? The instant finality. So when people wanted to do things, but didn't want insanely high fees to mint NFTs, for instance, on Ethereum, but wanted an EVM compatible option, right? They came to us. But and we work hand in hand with our partners, right? We're not just a shop that says come build on us and here's some support in some way. Whether it's Nick working hand in hand with projects, Lydia working with projects, myself, and the entire BD and product and marketing teams, we truly treat our partners or people that are building on us or want to work with us as part of this Avalanche community. We can't keep right when Top says, "How do we take trading cards into the next century?" This is the way to do so, right? So we work with these guys, but on top of the familiarity of Ethereum and the speed and the cost, I think a very big item that's top of mind of everybody, of course, is the environmental impact of blockchain. So today, actually, of all days, we have a report that just went live. So Ava Labs commissioned the Crypto Carbon Ratings Institute. This is Uli Gandalfsfer and Christian Stoll from MIT and the University of Technical Institute of Munich to do a study on the carbon footprint of Avalanche, but as well as the proof of stake chains as a whole versus proof of work chains. And Bitcoin, I believe, is several million U.S. households worth of carbon. Ethereum is about 1.5 million. Some of our competitors in the proof of stake chain, and to highlight proof of stake, of course, we're in a completely different universe, orders of magnitude less. I think Solana's around 1,000 U.S. households. Others are like in the high hundreds. Avalanche as a chain, the entirety utilizes 46 U.S. households worth of carbon in a year. That is 280 metric tons, of which we bought 560 to offset, so we're technically carbon negative. We've been working with this team. They did a complete climate-controlled study. The report is live today. I urge everybody to go and check it out. This is from climate scientists and some of the foremost scholars in this space. Sustainability matters. Speed matters, cost matters, but sustainability also matters. So when it comes to the sustainability of NFTs, that's why you see us kind of growing in the licensed product side, right? Whether it's Tops or Orange Comet that had the Islanders and other NHL properties, or the team over at Particle that decided to do a Banksy, or all the other artists that we're speaking to who want to do NFTs, but it doesn't fit in their ethos to do it in an unsustainable way. So the sustainability angle has been a key priority for us, and we've been driving that too. And on top of all that stuff, I think to your point, there's also the big names that bring credibility, right? The Deloitte, the partnership, the strategic alliance partnership with Deloitte to build products on Avalanche, the start path inclusion of Ava Labs with MasterCard, right? These are things that bring not just users, but they bring attention, not just from the daily users or the DeFi users, but from the household retail investor, from the institutions, from several other enterprises that look for a solution that's familiar to them, like Ethereum, but takes it a step forward, right? That does bring all the things of what a third generation blockchain should be.
Great.
I can speak to a few other items here as well.
Yes.
There are other items around that have been, very compelling for us. So, the Deloitte Alliance, right? You saw that come out, you mentioned it. And there's been questions like, how deep is that alliance? What's really happening? Are they building? And yeah, they've launched the first product on it. It's called Close As You Go. It helps disaster recovery victims, counties, municipalities, cities to go through the process much more quickly to get the assistance they need. And so that product is live. And so it's just taking that further, because as you start to get into subnets, and they have a very sharp technical team head by Peter Mueller over there, who's looking at these use cases and saying, okay, how can we use subnets? How can we use the semi-public or private subnets in order to meet these government use cases, in order to really streamline operations at those levels? And so we keep working through these, and we work very closely with them in order to try to push the new use cases out, and that takes a while, right? This is a lot of new technology, but we very much value that relationship, and we are very engaged in order to try to make the subnet use cases work for what their business use cases are as they go to apply them to their clients.
Yeah, I think that's
last bit.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to last bit highlight with an example of the importance of sustainability and the environmental impact is like just that funny little anecdote. Over at Blizzard, we speak with a lot of different projects, and a lot of the new projects that are popping up are folks that want to do NFT drops with different celebrities, different well-known figures. And one of the points that they highlighted today was like, hey, like these guys can get canceled for being environmentally wasteful. And so it's completely in their imperative to pick a chain that is green or greener, right? At least out of the other chains out there that they can choose from. So I just thought that was a funny anecdote that was timely as well.
Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking back to what Nick was saying about the Deloitte initiative. Early on when I was getting more involved in this space, I thought like, wow, this is a great solution for disaster relief, right? Like we've experienced, unfortunately, many of those, over time and as of recently. And it's been problematic, right? The inefficiencies of any level of government to gather relief is just ridiculous, right? So it's encouraging to see a big four, accounting firm and really a leader in I guess traditional finance, if you want to call it that. But in any case, spearheading the ability to make that more efficient. So. So when that came across, I was like, wow, Deloitte, good for Deloitte, good for Avalanche as well. So I suspect that will be a relationship that will continue to grow, and evolve as we look ahead into 2022.
Yeah, and James, I think it's unique too because it's not around cryptocurrency in any way, right? It's really tackling a workflow and making that workflow more efficient, and then trying to reduce the clawbacks, the government clawbacks, because of the processes are extremely complicated, and they're complicated for a reason. But this really makes it a lot easier to go through that. Everybody's on the same page. Everything's on chain. You can see where you are in the process, and you can see what's next. And so if there's any question of like, oh, did this certain piece happen? And the answer is, no, or, you get into a he said, she said, then you get into clawbacks, right? And that costs everybody money, and it's not an efficient process. So they're really creating, using the blockchain to create these efficient solutions for government that aren't necessarily finance related, and don't have the use of cryptocurrencies. And I think that's very unique.
I think one last thing, and you made a good point. This is great for Deloitte. It's massive for Avalanche, but more so than that, I think it's great for the broader kind of blockchain crypto community and economy. Right? It's validation for the technology, and for all the FUD that we see out there about crypto this and blockchain that. And it's unsustainable. Every day there's a new narrative that they try and kind of smear or hold us back as an industry. I think this is validation at one of the highest levels. Of course, especially when it gets into municipalities and states and the federal level, that blockchain technology is here to be used and it's here to stay. And that there's multiple use cases aside from whatever the hearings that want to take place on the Hill for optics. The use cases are here. The growth is here, and we're continuing to grow and build. Not just on Avalanche, but with the broader ecosystem as well.
Got it. Yeah, again, I think, some of these, like a Deloitte initiative and some of these other partnerships and events that occurred, and there are many, like I think I in the report, we covered like 24 different major events, all the way from major exchange listings, which I think it's important, right? It's healthy for the ecosystem, but not necessarily going to drive the fundamental activity, that we can see in the metrics. Again, like number of addresses, perhaps, but it still goes back to the developer growth, and still goes back to just revenue to the network and everything else, and TVL. But in any case, a lot, so a lot of what occurred, I think, is showing up in the data, but a lot hasn't yet. And I think Deloitte is probably an example of that, and some of these other initiatives. Another one that stuck out to me was Blizzard, right? So when we think about potential catalyst or sustainability, if the incentive program sort of exhausts itself at some point over the next quarter, there are other initiatives in the works, and one that stuck out to me was Blizzard. And I know, Lydia, you spoke about it briefly. Could you just tell us a little bit about how that came to be, like really kind of what it is and what it's aimed at, and how you think it will go sort of going forward? Like, is it going to be, what's the strategy, I guess, when it comes to the and the mandates? You touched on it a little bit, but I was just hoping you could expand on that a little bit more when it comes to Blizzard.
Yeah, happy to. And I think the team kind of looked at the different ways that the ecosystem is being supported. And one of the things I was missing was an ecosystem fund. And really, it's a very vital role, because in terms of supporting developer growth, oftentimes, what do you need to get something started? And it's capital, right? So that's kind of how we felt what was appropriate to fill in one of the gaps. And the mandate for Blizzard is to accelerate the digitization of the world's assets. And what that means is, helping people bring things online, and on using Avalanche, obviously. So that covers DeFi, gaming, NFTs, anything under the Web3 umbrella for member networks and DAOs. So the mandate is to also deploy capital quickly, so that as the ecosystem is growing, and growing very quickly right now, we obviously need to support that growth with capital in high quality teams and projects. So over time, I think we'll see the thesis at Blizzard evolve. And initially it was, the fund is still very young. It closed and launched in November. So right now we're seeing a lot of DeFi. We're definitely seeing a lot more gaming, a lot of infrastructure as well. So I think right now in the near future, we're definitely excited about how the next vertical on Avalanche is going to grow, which is, it looks like gaming to me. And then obviously infrastructure will enable cross-chain communication, cross-subnet communication potentially, just interoperability, and really taking advantage of the composability of blockchain.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's also, again, something that we'll be keeping an eye on over the next quarter. So that come next quarter, we can check in on it and see how it's progressing. So, I think, again, with just so much activity, over the quarter, I'd like to actually kind of bring it back to the transaction activity and those momentary spikes of transaction fees. There's actually, and it's really interesting to kind of think about, or when we look at the visual of daily active transactions, the fees actually declined quite rapidly as transactions were increasing. So at the all-time high of daily transactions, we actually saw quite a decline in gas fees. So, and that is really a result of a couple of things. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about the development of the core platform, because that, I think that was heavily the reason for that decline was heavily as a result of an implementation of Apricot, which I think it was phase 5 point, I can't remember the exact number, but I think as we saw the unleashing of Apricot and updates is when we saw a decline, right? So to me, that is some evidence of a solution actually working. And so where I'm kind of leading that is it's kind of thinking ahead, right? I know there are certain initiatives that you guys have internally and on the development front, and sort of what to expect. So outside of the partnerships and outside of building the ecosystem, like what's top of mind, I guess, for the Avalabs team and just the community as a whole when we think about what's next. And I know, Nick, we discussed this in the past, and I think it's important to touch on because a lot of it it does revolve around technical developments and solutions that just aren't there yet. And just curious. And what I'm getting at is, again, core development, subnets, and governance, right? We have yet to see on-chain governance, and I know that that's going to be something that I'm sure we can follow over the course of 2022. So again, in summary, like, tell us a little bit about the solutions around that were implemented and how that fits into the vision for 2022.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I could spend an entire hour just on this. There's so many cool things going on. So first of all, hats off to our platform team. They do the Avalanche Go node. They're the ones making all these changes and really refining things at such a rapid pace. That team's headed up by Patrick O'Grady and Steve, Dan, and Aaron. So that's exactly right. They really looked at what was happening, and they knew, I talked about this a little bit earlier, they knew they needed to tackle those three core areas, which was we needed to be fast. There needed to be fast time to finality. We needed to scale, and transaction costs needed to remain low. So when those spikes happened, it actually was right at the end of a release cycle when they were working on dynamic fees. And dynamic fees came out right after that. And so, and it was just in time, right? So we're kind of trying to anticipate what is happening and then figure out where we need to focus these really deep engineering resources. These are like the giant heads in the team. And so, and they got dynamic fees out, and then they did, they got Snowman ++ out, which dealt with contention, which also made things much faster, also reduced MEV on the chain. So there's all these, and like you said, there's 5 phases to Apricot, right? And I can go through all 5 of them, and then there's all these really deep things in them, which is, Snowman ++ and looking at block-based fees and changing the way blocks are structured a bit, and like how, the state management behind this growing chain is handled. But then, to keep it more high level, they're really just looking at how to do exactly that, which is how to optimize performance and how to make cross-chain interoperability work better, because it does become more and more important as we get into subnets. So as they work through kind of the pruning, which is this last phase of Apricot, has a lot around state management because it is getting quite big. So there's some pruning, there's some fast sync in there. And then they're really getting into making the X chain and optimizing that as it becomes a bigger part of the ecosystem, will get more usage. And then after that, it's just subnets. So, at this deep tech level, you've seen Patrick's been releasing Spaces, which was an example VM for developers to reference. And the way we look at it is we really organize our roadmap into kind of 4 core areas. And at the back of it is that core tech one, right? And as you go up a layer from that, you kind of get into the core properties. And the core properties are those things that allow users to really leverage this technology. So while the platform engineering team is really kind of deep in the weeds, there's another team that's just focusing about like, okay, how does the user best interact with that? And that's when you start to get into the wallets and their various incarnations, bridges, the Explorer. And so there's a ton of focus on that right now. And we will see releases of, multiple releases along those lines of creating a better core properties experience. And we don't just call it a wallet experience, because what we're doing is we're taking all the aspects of these core properties and we're really combining them into this curated experience to kind of try to abstract a lot of the technology away. Like, we don't really want people to think, oh, hey, I'm using blockchain right now, right? We want them to think like, I'm trying to do X and Y is helping me do that, and to create an experience that allows them to see, you shouldn't have to go to an Explorer to see your most recent transaction. It should just be right in your face as it's doing, and you should be able to see the state of it. sending, transferring, buying, swapping, all those things should be right at your fingertips rather than having to go to these disparate places and having these kind of experiences around. So we're working on these curated experiences to kind of keep the user interaction and the user workflows to something that people are familiar with rather than something that feels very foreign to them. And then as you go up a step from that, we kind of get into the builder world. Like you said it, the developers and the builders and the people bringing projects to the platform are critical. So we have a whole team focused on building modules that are going to help them to get up to speed faster. So if you're a game developer, we want you to be able to focus on the game, not the blockchain infrastructure, not the tokenomics of it, not payments rails and things like that. You can focus on the game, and then you'll be able to pull from these modules to get to market more quickly than if you had to do all those things yourself. And this goes into push button node deployment, push button validator, easy to access APIs. I mean, this list just kind of keeps going on and on forever. And then at the very end of that, right, there's kind of the external projects themselves. And, we have a whole team that supports those projects and really makes sure that they do have questions, right? Especially as they get into the usage of subnets and these things that are new, that we're there to help them along the way, again, to get to market quickly with the best product possible. But also they're informing us on like, hey, subnets need to be able to do this. And we might be like, oh, we didn't really think of that. And so, we add that into the backlog, we do these prioritizations, and then we're churning out this work based on where the demand is.
Excellent. Yeah. So kind of just recapping that in different layers, I'll probably get them out of order. But as we're looking ahead, what's top of mind? Obviously, core platform developing Go and EVM development for C chain optimization, making node launches faster, building out infrastructure to make it easier for users to access the ecosystem. Development of subnets that will allow for basically builders to go to market quicker, faster. And I think also, I think you mentioned before, sort of segmenting off into, which I like the use of the word cultures that's mentioned in the Blizzard announcement. And that's sort of, again, like maybe a shift from something like NFTs to gaming, like Lydia had mentioned, maybe as an area of focus now as we look ahead. So I think that kind of captures all the different pieces, but what we can we'll probably pay attention to though is like, yeah, let's take a look at that over the next quarter and beyond. Is how is the user experience evolving, and can we see that in the data, right, that we continue to collect and evaluate. So yeah, that's very interesting and very insightful. So I appreciate kind of you guys sharing sort of what's top of mind and vision without diving too far into it and disclosing some of the proprietary things I'm sure you're working on. So I appreciate that. So I think we're coming up on time here. Any closing thoughts from any folks?
Selkis, did you have anything you want to add? Otherwise, we can take a couple of these community questions here.
No, this is great. I just want to thank you all again for joining, and we do have 5 minutes left for a set of lightning round questions, so we can funnel those. And Chase, you can pick from them, and we'll see if how many we can get in the next 4 minutes 30 seconds.
Awesome. I'm just going to go down the list from most upvotes. And, if you guys don't want to answer them, just feel free to skip it. So the first one is Avalanche will compete against ETH L2, and that could eventually cost less than 1 cent per transaction. What is Avalanche's scaling strategy against that? And subnets will likely cost more gas fees in comparison to ZK rollups.
Happy to go head to head with those once they're live and actually performing what they intend to. We'll see what happens when they come.
Yeah, I mean,
Awesome.
I think layer twos have their own set of challenges. We're not going to get into all of the differences right now. I think that in subnets, you can actually set your own gas fees, so you could keep them extremely low if you wanted to. And so you will be able, if you're a builder, you will be able to establish a subnet, and you can set the rules on how that blockchain works. Now, we're going to advise you like, hey, that's not going to be a very secure way of doing it if you want that. But on the whole, it's there. And so, I think we'll be able to compete, right? I think the level twos are doing some very interesting things, and I think a lot of this technology is still evolving as we go through. So it's kind of like a wait and see, and we just kind of focus on what we think is very important and kind of work toward those goals.
I also think it's just apples and oranges, right? An L2's an L2. Avalanche could be considered an L1 or even an L0. So I don't think there's really head-to-head competition or comparisons that are fair there or on the same level. And then for the to come in the future stuff, I guess we'll wait and see when that comes, right?
Yeah, I mean, the L2s rely on the L1s. So if the L1 has problems, the L2 is going to have problems. And it's just, I mean, you can get into levels of technical details further than that, but that's just one of the struggles. All the technologies have their own challenges, and there's a lot of smart people trying to solve those problems. So again, I think we'll see how it plays out.
It's truly an industry of trade-offs. Next question has to do with kind of regulation, and there's like 3 different questions in here. So I guess broadly, has Avalanche been working with regulators, or how are you guys approaching that space?
So, I mean, I think the main thing here is our general counsel, Lee Schneider. He's fantastic. He's very connected to the space. He's one of the oldest attorneys in the business. He was formerly at EOS, and he's very connected into the regulatory circles. He's always paying attention to that. He's constantly reading and sending us updates and summaries with his team on what's happening. I mean, on the most recent reports, we get an executive summary, goes out to everybody, kind of says, here's what's going on, here's what we're leaning, and then they give a point of view on what's happening behind that. There's certainly relationships behind that too. I know Goon has specific relationships with regulators too, and we're always trying to kind of stay on the cusp of what's happening. It's definitely kind of a changing landscape. And so, we just try to see what the latest information is and then make decisions based on that.
I think to Nick's point, right, whether on the legal side or on the leadership side, we're not kind of, a lot of people in this space are kind of catching up always, or like playing catch up to what regulations come if and when they do. We tend to kind of skate where we think the puck is going. So we're always being kind of proactive, looking ahead, wondering what if and what could happen, and positioning ourselves in a more compliant way in the future, and working with regulators to educate them, right? Because I think Ryan does a great job of this daily on Twitter, right? Whether they read it or not is a different question. Regulators, for the most part, love the sound bites. Policymakers love the sound bites, but aren't really putting in the time and effort to learn. So part of our job, more than just being compliant or hoping to, or kind of skating to where the puck's going in terms of compliance, is also sitting down, working with regulators, teaching them and educating them. And to their credit, some are very, proactive and very helpful and champions of the industry. So, Lydia.
Yeah, I'm just going to build on we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can best educate and get the regulators to better understand all of the different use cases without kind of throwing out a blanket statement saying that all cryptocurrencies are securities or all cryptocurrencies are commodities, right? Like, there are obviously nuances. So we definitely want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward as representatives of the industry to provide them with all the resources that they need, right? Like, ultimately, it comes down to working together to grow the space as opposed to trying to constrict the growth of blockchain as a whole, just because we could have done a better job educating everyone.
Yeah, I love that point of kind of all of us working together. It's not necessarily one network versus another network. Like, we're all playing this game, trying to get regulators to understand, what all this is ultimately about, as Selkis always does on Twitter for us.
That's a really important point, right? Real quick. Sorry, I want to jump on this because this is something that we try to focus on. Look, within crypto Twitter, we're all fiercely competitive, right? As we should be. Like, steel sharpens steel, all that great stuff. We should compete against other L1s and everything else. But at a core level, I like to use this analogy. It's probably not the best one, but like we're like mice feeding off of little crumbs when there's an entire kitchen out there, right? What we're building, what all of us in this industry, you guys are doing, everybody's doing, is trying to move this industry forward. And if people are too busy fighting amongst themselves, on the basic things that we need to work together on as an industry to kind of move forward, right? We're trying to go after the incumbents. We're trying to go after TradFi. We're trying to change the way that these systems are right now and make it more accessible, faster, cheaper, easier, less opaque, more transparent, every other buzzword you can say. But if we're too busy saying no ETH, no AVAX, no BTC, whatever it is, we're fighting each other instead of at some just level working together to move all of us forward against the wave that we're trying to fight. So.
Totally. Couldn't have said it better myself. It looks like we're at the top of the hour now. Thank you for everyone who tuned in, asked questions, and participated in the chat. Thought this was a really great conversation. If anyone has additional ideas or metrics that they'd like to see in future quarterly reports, please feel free to pass them our way. Find us on Twitter. Or go through the Messari website. We'd love to chat with you. Selkis, you got any parting words?
Thank you, and we'll do it again next quarter.
One thing real quick, guys. We came and joined you today. We're having the Avalanche Summit in Barcelona, March 22nd to 29th. We'd love to have everybody on this call or on this cast join us in Barcelona to learn more about the Avalanche ecosystem, meet partners. Ryan, we'd love to have you up on stage on a panel or something. So this is an official invitation. We'll follow up with you and the rest of the Messari team. We look forward to seeing you there too.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll have at least some representation there. I basically just go where my team tells me, so we will see what the calendar looks like. But a lot of great people on our team, as you can see from this report and this call itself. Thank you, everyone, and we'll be in touch soon. Hope everybody enjoyed this latest quarterly call. And if you have any comments on the report itself, the substance of this call, what we could do better, what we could automate, and what we could ultimately do to scale this, we are all ears. We're early on in this beta for Messari's quarterly initiative. So thanks again, everyone, and really excited to run it back in April.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.